Okie doke. Okay. So, hi everybody, my name is Adrienne. I'm doing a presentation on the use of cinnamon for diabetes. Oops, that's not good. Okay. So the cinnamon that I looked at in Ocean Beach Peoples, which is a vegetarian consumer co-op. It's kind of a high-end grocery and herbal store, and they did have an herbalist available on site. He wasn't really able to answer that many questions about diabetes, but he was able to direct me to the cinnamon, which was about $15 a pound, compared to the raw cinnamon that you have that's unbound I'm passing around is about $8 a pound in a Mexican store in Highland Park. So I'm sure we're all familiar with diabetes, especially in the older population. We see it a lot. There's a lot of recommendations related to lifestyle changes, specifically changing diet, increasing daily exercise. There's oral medications that are available. Metformin's a really common one, doesn't have a lot of side effects. There's also injectable insulin. We tend to see insulin, as you all know, in people who have diabetes. It's a little bit less controlled, and they're having a hard time getting the numbers down with the oral medications. What I didn't put up here is there are some injectable medications like the Byettas and things like that that have other mechanisms of action. But basically, if you're an older person who is diabetic, you can do your best to follow the diet exercise recommendations. You can do your best to take the oral medications and still not necessarily see a substantial change in your A1C. And so you'll end up going to your nurse practitioner and you'll be told frequently, it's just not necessarily getting better. What are you doing? What's your daily practices? We have to figure this out. And I think in a lot of older people, insulin is a very scary thing, and they don't want to progress to where they have to give themselves shots. So you're left with a lot of questions, and I think that area is a space for alternatives, which I should say complementary alternatives. In any case, so cinnamon is a food. It's a spice that we add into pretty much everything, and I think probably most people here have had cinnamon in some form or another. The one main thing I want to talk about is that this is the bark of trees, and that's exactly what it looks like. You'll see as I'm passing it around. This is from the genus Cinnamomum lauriceae. In any case, this is the trick about cinnamon. Most of the cinnamon that you buy commercially is not actually cinnamon, which is more expensive. It's different versions of cassia, which has a similar flavor. It actually is often known as tasting more cinnamony than cinnamon. So you want to make sure if you're using this as an herb or a supplement that you are using the real cinnamon, which generally is from Sri Lanka or Ceylon. So these are the mechanisms of action for a lot of hypoglycemic herbs, and there are many. So if you're looking at diabetes, which is what I look at, there's lots of different things you can take. The one that is particular to cinnamon is that it appears to really increase the glucose uptake out of the bloodstream. And the way that this is done is that this GLUT4 gene acts kind of like a pseudo-insulin. So it's opening those channels for the blood sugar to be taken into the cells themselves, which of course drops the circulating blood sugar, which is a good thing. It also facilitates, so it does that, which is great. Okay. It also does a few other things that are really beneficial. So there's a lot of data on the fact that cinnamon is effective for diabetes. Certainly not supplanting medications and lifestyle changes, but as an addition to their regimen. So you have, I did a PubMed search, and I basically used diabetes and cinnamon and came up with 151 results. I also actually did an Amazon.com search, and I came up with thousands of results. In English, there were thousands. In Spanish, there were hundreds, but there were still many. So the idea is that it is statistically significantly associated with a decrease in this fasting plasma glucose. Also cholesterol, triglyceride levels, so very good. The other thing that's interesting is for older gentlemen who are diabetic, there's a lot of erectile dysfunction that can happen. There's neuropathy that can affect their sexual practices. So let's say you have an older client who is trying to have a baby, perhaps. They've showed that the combination of ginger and cinnamon have really beneficial effects on the sperm viability, the motility. It increases testosterone, LH, FSH. It's very good for reproductive functions for males with diabetes. So that's a good thing to know. The other thing that it does is that it actually inhibits this accumulation of these really negative products in the kidney. So in rats, it basically ameliorated diabetic nephropathy, which of course is a huge thing in humans, only tested in rats so far, and it improves the insulin action in the brain. So the dosing is essentially what you probably would eat if you were eating cinnamon, 1 to 2 teaspoons per day. There is some association of toxicity with overconsumption of cinnamon, and it's kind of interesting because the recommendations vary by whether or not you're eating it like during holiday season. So I guess they assume that this is a spice that's associated with some holidays, and so it's okay to have a little bit more of it sometimes during the year. So I have this information, and I can see if I can get it printed for you guys. So this is all about diabetes. This is about the fact that everybody knows that diabetes is an issue. It's certainly an issue among Hispanics. And in California, where we have the largest concentration of Hispanics, we also have the largest population of people with diabetes concentrated. So that ends up being $27.6 billion annually within California. So that's a problem. So I see cinnamon as representing an interesting avenue for diabetes research and complementary / integrative medicine for Hispanics with diabetes. And the reason I think it's Hispanic specific is not just because I'm Mexican, and so that's kind of what I know about as I'm trying to learn, is that there's some common Mexican drinks that feature cinnamon. Horchata, which you see here, has rice water, cinnamon, and sugar. Oops, sorry. I thought it was going to go red on my screen. It is. Anyway, and the champurrado, which is something that I'm going to be talking about specifically, has this dark chocolate that you see passed around that's very concentrated, cinnamon, whole milk, sugar, cornmeal, and chili. The thing I want to point out here is that in horchata, you're really getting something that's not necessarily going to be great for a diabetic person. You're getting water with sugar in it. And the cinnamon would be great for them to take, but I don't think that it necessarily offsets the fact that it's a high, you might as well drink a soda, basically. But with the champurrado, I don't know how many people have had champurrado. If you haven't had champurrado, it's very similar to chocolate malto meal, because the idea is that the chocolate and the cinnamon and the cornmeal is drank while it's hot, which is why I didn't bring it for you guys, because it would be solid by this point. But it replaces a meal, essentially. So in my case study, Gloria is an 86-year-old woman, Mexican-American, type 2 diabetes. She's a widow. She lives alone. She's on a fixed income. And she constantly goes back to the doctor and is being told that her A1C is 9 to 10. And this is a problem. And so when we talk to her, what we find out is that she only eats 1 meal per day. And that's because she has the habit, which is culturally a well-known phenomenon, that she doesn't like eating alone. Eating is a social event, and since there isn't anyone who's visiting her regularly, she's not eating very much. So what suggestions can we make? Well, first we'd want to assess whether or not she is somebody who would even drink this sort of thing. Just because she is an older Mexican-American woman doesn't necessarily mean that this is part of her lifestyle. But if she does, we could talk about the fact that cinnamon might have a positive effect. And we could essentially recommend the champurrado as a culturally sensitive version of a carnation breakfast. So I think that's an option, and I think that it would replace at least 1 or 2 meals that day where she would be having none. So would I recommend this? I probably would recommend this. I think it's a great avenue for research. I'm interested in looking at it. I would use the nursing, I would use ADPI, which I know you guys are all familiar with, if I was going to introduce this to an older population, because the assessment's important. I would definitely want to plan, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. And I would really want to kind of follow it through and make sure that it's showing up in her A1C levels. You know, I would want to make sure that we're not doing a heavily sugared version. So you'll see the horchata that you have here is very sweet. You can make it at home and not have that level of sweetness. Same thing with the champurrado, which traditionally isn't sweet. It can have cornmeal and actually chili. So it's more of a savory kind of drink. But I would definitely recommend it. I think that it's an interesting avenue, and I'm kind of excited about what I uncovered here. So I know that was fast. I'm sorry. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Cynthia, I'll have you next.
Do you?
Yeah.
What's the best way to